Okay, so our friend Glenn Youngkin. All right, there's a lot of interesting elements to that, but I'll save them. He did some really interesting work this week as governor in regards to his vetoes, including a Confederate tax veto that I'm going to get into a little. All right, so Governor Glenn Youngkin vetoed bills meant to ensure access to contraceptives and close tax loopholes for Confederate heritage groups Friday night, continuing a record breaking veto spree that also nixed measures to ban guns from psychiatric hospitals.
He is feeling it this week. This guy is
Yeah,
just on
he's
a
feeling it.
spree. He
And
he has the wet ass pussy this week. He
he's
took it off Cardi B.
he is wet for guns and psych wards.
Yeah, right.
He gets his panties wet for the daughters of the Confederacy.
He should use that song as his, campaign song when he comes on, his intro music. He's on a roll. He's got momentum.
He is. He's got the big mo.
Yes.
Remind parents to store weapons out of their children's reach. Because why would you not want to remind parents of that? Acting on bills that the General Assembly sent back to his desk in April without his proposed amendments, Youngkin signed 7 and vetoed 48, taking his veto total for the year to 201, more than the 120 that the previous record holder, Democrat Terry McAuliffe, issued over 4 years as governor. Youngkin's moves solidify his record as a hard-right Republican, something often obscured by the governor's upbeat image and ability to avoid taking action on Democratic priorities until this year, Senate Majority Leader Scott A. Sorovell said Saturday. Before Democrats assumed full control of the General Assembly in January, a Republican-held House blocked many of the Democratic-controlled Senate's bills from reaching his desk. Quote, I told many people that after this session, we would find out where the governor really stood because he's been so opaque trying to maintain his friendly, suburban, moderate basketball dad image, he said, but now we know. Youngkin touted his desire for, quote, compromise on collective priorities as he announced his actions, which wrapped up work on this year's 60-day legislative session. He sounded almost wistful about having to resort to vetoes in some cases.
Okay, he vetoed a bill. Let me just take a pause there because we compromise on collective priorities. Vetoes a bill that says that parents have to be recommended, and reminded of how to safely store guns so their kids don't get them. You vetoed that bill, which means that had majority support, and you said no. That's a compromise? Who are you representing there? God damn it, no big government's going to tell me where I can store my gun or where I can't. I massage my prostate with my shotgun. You ever massage your prostate with a Remington 870? You'll blow a load so big you thought you spilled a skillet full of sausage gravy all about your bed. Don't tell me I got to store where you want me to store. Just a recommendation. That's all.
Apparently, the libs don't know that the only thing that'll shrink a man's prostate after 50 is gunpowder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Honestly, that was the least crazy veto of the
psych
ones,
ward
of the ones that I'm covering. The Confederate one, as you know, I have personal photos to comment on that. I thought the Confederate one was actually probably the craziest. That was probably the craziest because he's comparing it to free Tibet license plates.
Yeah.
By vetoing our legislation, Governor Youngkin is now on the record agreeing with the extremists in his party, including Donald Trump, who conflate contraception with abortion, said Senator Ghazala F. Hashmi and Delegate Marcia S. Sia Price, said in a written statement about a pair of identical bills they sponsored that would have put a right to obtain and use contraception into Virginia law. Youngkin had proposed changing the bills to simply express the sentiment of the legislature that people have access to contraception under federal law. So basically, under federal law, they have access to contraception. He wanted to reduce it to saying, yep, we have access under federal law.
Yeah. And it's true. This guy won as a moderate, despite being pretty ideologically right wing, because he didn't accept Trump's endorsement. He won without Trump's help. But very famously, He rejected Trump's help. He didn't want him coming to speak for him, which was the politically smart thing to do back in, 2021. But he's not moderate, as you could see.
Right. And we'll see. I'm going to talk a little bit about how he won, and how he won reinforces the idea that that was actually very smart politics, because he really won off traditionally Democrat constituencies.
Right.
Hashmi and Price have said those amendments would have gutted the bills, rendering them meaningless if federal law changed. Letting his amendments die without a vote in April, the House and Senate sent the bills back to the governor in their original form, forcing him to choose between signing or vetoing them. Let me be crystal clear. I support access to contraception, Youngkin's written statement said. However, we cannot trample on the religious freedoms of Virginians. I mean, you don't like it, don't take it.
Yeah, you have the religious freedom not to take it.
Yeah, don't use it. Separately, in his veto statement, Youngkin and the legislation failed to include adequate conscience clause protections for providers, and also undermines the fundamental right of parents to make decisions concerning their children's upbringing and care. Other bills vetoed by Youngkin include, so this to me is the craziest here. Youngkin vetoed a pair of identical bills that would have eliminated state tax loopholes for the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the Confederate Memorial Literary Society, and the Stonewall Jackson Memorial, Inc. The groups are exempt from state recordation taxes and real and personal property taxes, an issue brought to the General Assembly by a Virginia Beach high school student after her lawyer father discovered the loophole in an obscure part of state law. Good for her. Youngkin had sought to duck the issue with an amendment requiring that the bills be voted on again next year and calling for a study. I don't know where we actually stand on this whole Confederate thing. I understand there are some Virginians still waiting on the shore for reinforcements. This conflict has not been resolved yet. After the legislator rejected that, he pulled out his veto pen. Quote, narrowly targeting specific organizations to gain or lose such tax exemptions sets an inappropriate precedent, he wrote in his veto statement. Choosing winners and losers is imprudent and undermines the tax system's fairness. I mean, that's a really unfortunate choice of words when you're talking about a Confederate organization's tax breaks.
Choosing winners and losers.
I think history has chosen the winners and losers there, Mr. Youngkin.
No, we wouldn't want to take sides on that, or
on that pro or anti-Confederacy. Youngkin also vetoed a bill that would have banned the further issuance of state license plates commemorating the sons of Confederate veterans or General Robert E. Lee. In his veto statement, Youngkin noted that the state offers so many specialty plates, including those advocating both sides of some hotly contested issues, that they cannot be construed as endorsements by the Commonwealth. The department also offers specialty plates for debated social issues, this is a quote from him, such as advocacy for fox hunting, coal, or internet infrastructure, he wrote. In some instances, the plates represent overtly political statements, including pro-abortion, pro-life, for and against the Second Amendment, and even international relations concerning Tibet. You know what I don't hear in that list? A single thing that represents support for a war that was fought to defend slavery. And don't give me that fucking states' rights shit. You know why? Because I've been down in that neck of the woods. Now, for those of you who are from the South, the pictures I'm about to show, I assume are not going to shock you. As a Yankee, I could not believe what I was seeing. So just a short interlude. I'm eventually going to do a segment on this, so I don't want to step on that too much. But just to give you an idea of what groups like this do down there, in New Orleans, a city that I believe is 80% black, 80% black, is the Confederate Museum. There is a museum dedicated to the Confederacy, appropriately enough. It's right off what was known until recently, and frankly, in popular parlance, still known as Lee Circle, where there's a big column that until about 3 years ago had a big statue of Robert E. Lee on it. Yeah, so this is it. So you can see now when I went to it, part of the reason I was shocked was it says Civil War Museum, right? So I was expecting a Civil War museum, but it's actually, it goes by another name too. I think it's Museum of the Confederacy or something. So here you go.
Yeah, that's like when Fox News says fair and balanced. You know, that's what they mean by
yes.
Civil War Museum.
No, outside it says Civil War Museum to trick all the Yankees.
Yeah.
Like me, who had, I couldn't even imagine that you would have a museum in this day and age that has Jefferson Davis's personal effects lovingly displayed as if he's a great man to be honored. So this is the main hall of that museum. Now here's some of the things you can buy there. These are mugs of Confederates. You can also buy CSA memorabilia, belt buckles, that kind of thing. Here are portraits of Confederate leaders. Here's Jefferson Davis being quoted like a great man, right? Now I kind of collect mugs in my journeys, but I didn't want to put money in their pockets, not even as an oddity. So I didn't buy one, but you
That'd
can
also
see,
be an odd one to just sip on the show casually without realizing it.
Well, I would never use it.
Yeah, no, I know.
Like just as evidence of what's that? But I was like, I don't even want to give them the $10. But yeah, so this is the kind of organization that still exists in parts of the South. I had no idea that until I went to this museum that you could still have something like this in this day and age. And this is in a city that is 80% black. So you want to see the power of white people. Anyone who says we're post-racial, we're post-racism, structural racism doesn't exist. Look at this. This still exists in a city that is 80% black. This museum is allowed to exist. So just a little digression there. This is the kind of thing that Youngkin feels should get a tax break because he doesn't want to take sides on the issue.
Right. Don't want to pick winners and losers.
Don't want to pick winners and losers. Youngkin vetoed identical bills requiring school boards around the state to notify parents every year of their responsibility to safely store firearms in the home. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Quote, this proposed legislation is unnecessary for responsible parents and ineffective in persuading the irresponsible, Youngkin wrote. All right, so listen, Glenn, I'm the kind of person who's not really inclined to wear a seatbelt, but because in New York, they have made the penalty so strict for not wearing a seatbelt, I wear a fucking seatbelt. I'm in the habit now of wearing a seatbelt. They broke me. I wear a seatbelt. I promise you, if you okay, so you feel that would be ineffective? You know, I could kind of see that. Why don't you suggest something stricter? Why don't you suggest something like you get fined if you have children in the house and don't properly store your firearm? That might work.
That'd be picking winners and losers.
That'd be picking winners and losers. Youngkin, who won the executive mansion on a theme of parental rights in K-12 education, said the bills had, quote, a singular focus on one parental responsibility, which applies to a subset of parents, omitting other legal obligations like providing an environment free of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Don't see what the one has to do with the other. Youngkin vetoed a pair of bills that would have banned firearms from hospitals providing psychiatric services. I mean, what what could possibly go wrong in the psych ward with firearms? Youngkin's veto message said hospitals already have the authority to ban guns from their premises, allowing them to have violators charged with trespassing. Yeah, okay, we understand that a hospital can do that. The question is, should all psychiatric hospitals with mentally ill people in them not be allowed to have guns in them? Right. So that any psych hospital with an irresponsible administration that would think it would be a good idea to have firearms inside will not have that option.
Right.
Youngkin also vetoed a pair of identical bills to prohibit this. I really don't get to prohibit the sale or possession of ghost guns, weapons that have no serial number and are often made of plastic or other parts that can pass through medical detectors, otherwise known as the anti-Mossad bill. Youngkin's veto statement said the measure might affect sellers of industrial parts such as aluminum that become part of those guns. That one, I don't know what the fuck he's even talking about. It's going to affect I mean, obviously, this is just an excuse for the gun nuts to keep the gun nuts happy. But
well, that's what's crazy about this. Yeah, I just want to add something before we go to our last two pieces for this. Is that these are vetoes, which means that these laws pass through the state Congress. Now, we know Virginia is a state that has been trending bluer and bluer as of late, which is how these laws got passed in the first place. Now, Glenn Youngkin won in 2021, as Russell will explain in just a moment, by convincing a lot of traditional Democratic voters to vote for him because of some overreach on the Democratic side and combined with just a truly atrocious candidate that the Democrats ran against him, Terry McAuliffe, a lifelong Bill Clinton bagman, basically. But he won by convincing moderate Democrats to vote for him, and now these laws are being passed as a reflection of the will of a state that has trended bluer over the past 15 years. This is just a true head scratcher from a political standpoint. Like I don't understand what the calculation in his mind is. It's not like you are it's not like you're negotiating with the other side here. You're taking out a veto pen and taking these truly extreme measures to veto laws that were passed as a result of popular will in the state having shifted dramatically over the last 15 years. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. Yeah. It seems like he's overstepping his mandate.
Yeah.
Because his mandate was a very thin mandate. And that was a mandate based on something that the best reporting on how Youngkin became the governor of blue trending Virginia in 2021.
Right.
Is a 4-part series that Matt Taibbi did under his Substack racket, Loudoun County, Virginia, A Culture War in 4 Acts. Now, Loudoun County has Thomas Jefferson High School, which is the #1 ranked public high school in the country. So people who care very deeply about the education of their children, namely immigrants, moved to Loudoun County en masse, particularly Asian immigrants, particularly Indian immigrants. P.S. A lot of DEI, and I'm gonna say anti-racism rather than critical race theory to be clear what I'm talking about. I'm really talking about this Ibram X. Kendi, the only way to solve racism is with racism kind of thinking. That got into the school, and as it does everywhere that it rears its head, it created division, hostility, anger. Ironically, you're having these racist arguments being made, but it wasn't really the white people who were dominating the attendance at Thomas Jefferson. It was Asians. It was Asians who were mostly getting in rather than whites. So they started they hired a kind of DEI consultancy firm for $500,000 that, amongst its insane recommendations, recommended that children snitch, basically, if they hear anything that they perceive as in any way racist, basically creating like a junior Stasi. They very famously had a slave catching exercise. Presumably the people who put it together meant well, but you got to imagine how stupid a person would have to be not to see how that could go wrong. But this created, and also the gender stuff was coming up there. And all of it just built up into a huge groundswell of support for Youngkin in Loudoun County, who promised to restore parental rights. And Terry McAuliffe, if you remember, he did not help himself on the debate stage by saying he didn't think parents should have any say over their children's education. Maybe one of the worst gaffes in the history of politics. I think he lost the campaign right there. Like, that statement, that was it. That was everything parents feared. So I'm not doing it justice. Read this 4-part series if you're curious about it. It's really, really fucking crazy. As long as we have had this show, I have spoken out against those cultural experiments, not because I am not in empathy with the goal, which frankly, I think most of these people are grifters who run these consultancies. I don't think they actually have a goal of resolving racism. I think they have a goal of perpetuating racial division because that's their bread and butter. And that's my issue with it. If I thought it worked, I would shut up about it. But my argument has always been, if we don't dissociate the left from these people, and if we don't shut them down, you get Youngkins, you get DeSantis's, and what these people are going to do with power, you are not going to like.
Well, you see it here.
This is it. This is proving the point. This is what I have been speaking out about for as long as we've had this show. I have warned, as long as we have had this show, if you keep talking this shit, if you keep taking this approach to these questions, you're going to revive these cultural conservatives who had been a laughingstock, who had been driven out of the public square. You're going to re-empower them, reinvigorate them, and what they are going to do is going to set us back decades. And you see it right here. Now, on the other side, on the more economic side, Virginia, under both Republicans and Democrats, was long the worst state for workers' rights in the nation. So getting away from the cultural question, you also have a demoralized working class with no particular motivation to come out for Democrats. Now, to be fully accurate, Virginia made the top of the Oxfam list in 2018 and 2019. Now, when the Democrats took over, they did make some typical Democrat reforms. And what I mean by that is tiny incremental reforms. They did increase the minimum wage from $7.25 to $12, and they empowered the government to negotiate union contracts with public employees. But they did not repeal the right to work law, although there was some attempt made at that. So you did have some Democrats get in and try to improve it somewhat. But it's the workers in Virginia are caught in a typical Democrat-Republican dynamic. Do you want the one who's going to break your knees or the one who's going to cut off your legs? Because a lot of the people who stopped them from repealing the right to work law were the blue dog Democrats, of which they have a surfeit in the Virginia legislature. It wasn't just Republicans versus Democrats. That's how the state became that much of a shithole. It's still not great. Now it's number 27. It's ranked number 27 for workers' rights.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's that's a really fascinating story, and just, a great reminder that anti-Trump Republicans are not necessarily the moderates, and also, to look back on how that state got there. Now they are stuck with a governor who for some reason feels a need to, I don't know, fall on his sword for a base that is becoming increasingly irrelevant statewide. So we'll see how that works out. He's not up for re-election this year. I believe he's up next year, 2025.
Yeah, see, that's the other side of it. I agree with you. You got elected partly because South Asians flipped on you who always vote Democrat.
Yeah.
And now you're going to like be like, yeah, no, guns and psych wards up to the hospital.
Right. Oh, the law says that they can't have them there? Well, fuck the law. I'll veto the law, right? Yeah. Seems like quite the move.
Please clap.